everyone's favorite villain in every teen movie you've ever seen, Stephen Miller. This man actually worked with Robert Spencer to put anti-Muslim ads in college newspapers across the country. Of course, the new head of the CIA received one of the highest awards of distinction from Act for America. Let me just say that one more time. An organization that the Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the U.S. government itself recognizes as a hate group gave one of its highest honors to our new CIA head. He's not alone. Jeff Sessions also received an award from Frank Gaffney's group. And of course, Michael Flynn, who actually serves on the board of advisors for that hate group. Now, before Michael Flynn became famous for his Russia dealings, long before he was, spreading conspiracy theories, retweeting conspiracy theories about how Hillary Clinton is running a child sex ring out of a pizza parlor, he was spreading conspiracy theories about Islam. Frank Gaffney, Michael Flynn very famously said that Islam is not a religion. It's not a religion at all. It's a political ideology. It's a cancer. Not Islamic terrorism, not Islamic extremism, not violence in the name of Islam, just Islam itself. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, but he's not really part of the administration anymore. He doesn't belong there. He shouldn't be on this list. Except that it turns out that the president agrees.
And let's talk about another retired general, and that would be Mike Flynn, who he has chosen as national security advisor. He is highly admired for his work as an intelligence officer, but he has a history of controversial views about Islam. He said in an interview in July and at a conference in August that Islam is not a real religion, but a political ideology masked behind a religion. Is he in line with how President-elect Trump views Islam?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think so. In other words, the President of the United States believes that Islam is not a religion. It's a political ideology. Understand what that means. What he is saying is that the guarantees of freedom of religion that every other religion in this country enjoys don't apply to Islam because it's not a religion. And so therefore it doesn't need to be protected under the Constitution. That's what this means. To say that Islam is not a religion is to say therefore it has no religious protections. It's as simple as that. And here I think we get to the very core of what's going on right now in this marriage between the White House, the administration, and these anti-Muslim fringe groups. Because this isn't just about Islamophobia. This isn't just about anti-Muslim sentiment. What's happening here is a fundamental redefining of Islam. It's a reorientation of what it means to be Muslim in America and how those things are at odds with each other. And this is, I think, the way in which to understand these initial actions of the administration. Take the Muslim ban. Yeah, I know that the president has said it's not really a Muslim ban because it's not about Muslims and it's not really about religion and that it's about keeping Americans safe. That's not true. It is a Muslim ban because the president and his people have said it's a Muslim ban. This is a president who repeatedly on the campaign trail said he wanted to ban all Muslims from America. This is a president who repeatedly on the campaign trail said he wanted to create a registry of Muslims in the United States, including Muslim citizens. This is a man who said that he is willing to send American citizens to Guantanamo Bay. So when he says this isn't really about Islam, it turns out it's not true. When he says that this is not a religious test, it's not true. He himself has said repeatedly that non-Muslims in any one of these 7 banned countries would be allowed in the U.S., but Muslims would not. In other words, if you are a Christian facing persecution in Yemen, you can come to the United States. But if you're a Shia in Yemen facing slaughter and starvation, you're out of luck. It is a religious test. And by the way, this notion that we've let in more Christians or more Muslims than Christians is yet Another falsehood from this president. And it's not about keeping us safe. The fact of the matter is that zero Americans have been killed by foreign nationals from any of these banned countries. If this was about keeping us safe, it would probably include some different countries, perhaps the countries whose foreign nationals have actually attacked America, have actually killed Americans. But it doesn't. And in fact, not only is this not about keeping us safe, as almost unanimously held by military and intelligence professionals, what this ban does is make us even more in danger. If I can get this to work, maybe. Yeah, there we go. It actually provides precisely the kind of propaganda that organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda use to their advantage. So again, this isn't just about Islam, this is about a fundamental reorientation of what it means to be Muslim in America. Look at the latest decision by the Trump administration in dealing with extremism in the United States, right? We now have, hold on, let me go back there, sorry. The Countering Violent Extremism program in the United States, as some of you have heard, under this administration will no longer target white nationalists, white supremacists, anti-government extremists, or far-right extremists. From now on, the CVE program is going to be concerned exclusively with Islamic extremists, which should come as a surprise, because you are 7 times more likely to be killed by a white terrorist than by an Islamic terrorist. This week alone, 3 different people were arrested on terrorism charges, all of them white nationalists. Yesterday, a man walked into a bar and proudly he shot 2 Middle Easterners and killed one of them. And he admitted quite clearly that he shot them because they were Middle Easterners. And yet, we have an administration now that says that by definition, if you're white, regardless of the ideology that promotes your violence, you are no longer going to be targeted under the CVE program. This despite the fact that we have seen over and over again, just last year alone, we had Robert Duggar. Robert Duggar, if you are unfamiliar with Robert Duggar, he's the Tennessee pastor who put together an elaborate plan to drive from Tennessee to upstate New York to the town of Islamburg. Yeah, there's a town in New York called Islamburg, let it go. And to slaughter the Muslim community there, men, women, and children, in his words, with bombs and machetes. He, of course, was arrested in an FBI sting, and although he was convicted earlier this year, it wasn't for terrorism charges. It was for hate crime charges, because apparently that's not terrorism. Or Robert Deere, who, in the name of Christ, as he himself said, went into a Planned Parenthood clinic and opened fire in order to save the babies, as he said, killing even an Iraq War veteran. He too was arrested, but not for terrorism. What I'm saying to you is that even though you are 7 times more likely to be killed by a white terrorist than an Islamic terrorist, that's even including the fact that we don't even call these guys terrorists. But again, that's not important as far as the administration goes. It's not part of what it means to deal with extremism. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise when you see this unbelievable rapid spread of these anti-government white nationalist organizations throughout the country, many of whom have been involved in countless attacks against Americans. But again, that doesn't count. Despite the fact that the government itself, the Department of Homeland Security, says that violent right-wing extremists are the single greatest threat to Americans, despite the fact that nearly 3/4 of law enforcement in this country say that white nationalist terror is a top priority for them, a top threat, whereas only 46% of law enforcement agencies say Islamic terror is, that still doesn't matter. Because in this fundamental realignment of what it means to be Muslim, Islam is the only kind of extremism that exists. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that this has led, over the last year or so of this campaign, to a giant spike in attacks against Muslims, against Muslim houses of worship, an unprecedented number of hate crimes against Muslims. Of course, it's not just even Muslims. I mean, we saw just this week the 60th bomb threat just since the inauguration. The 60th bomb threat to a Jewish house of worship or a Jewish organization in this country. My friend Jonathan Greenblatt at ADL says that he has not in his life seen this level of anti-Semitism in this country before, as he has since the inauguration. And this should remind us of something I think very important, and probably the most important thing that I can say, which is that this is not really about Islam. It's not really about Islam. Anti-Muslim, Islamophobic sentiment, it's not about Islam. This is about something else. This is about a crisis of identity that we are having in this country. Earlier I said that what's beautiful and miraculous about the American national identity is that rather than being based on some kind of homogeneity, it's instead based on an adherence to certain values, certain ideals, certain principles. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful idea. And it's one that has allowed countless immigrants who have come to these shores to feel as American as people who have been here for generations and generations. That I can't think of another country that can boast something that amazing. But here's the problem, is that in times of societal stress, and I believe we are certainly in one of those moments in American history right now, in times of societal stress, it becomes very difficult to come to an agreement about what exactly those values mean. What you see instead is this fundamental divide in this country about what it even means to be American. How do you define yourself as American? And of course, you see this a lot, right? The problem with identity, whether it's collective identity, national identity, or even individual identity, is that it's not that easy to say who you are, but it's pretty easy to say who you aren't. And now we are facing that again, as we have many times in our past, as a nation. Once again, we are in this place where we are having a conversation not so much about who we are as a nation, but about who we aren't as a nation. You see this in the slogans that we've been seeing everywhere. This idea that those in this country who have for generations enjoyed just a sense of primacy, simply for the color of their skin or the length of time that they've been here in the United States, that they feel as though they are under siege in some way. And they are looking for a way, when confronted with a changing political landscape, a changing racial landscape, a changing religious landscape, to redefine who they are. And so, how did they do that? They look for someone to define themselves against. It's an old story in America. It's a very old story. In fact, everything that is being said about Muslims today, that they're not really American, that you can't be both Muslim and American, that they're not part of us, that they're untrustworthy, that they're fearful. Everything that's being said about Muslims today was said about Catholics in the 19th century. In the 19th century, in the 1890s especially, after an influx of Catholic immigrants, Irish and Italian immigrants into the United States, you saw this unbelievable anti-Catholic sentiment take hold in the United States. We actually had a political party called themselves the Know Nothings. A political party formed in the United States, ran for both houses of Congress, actually ran for the presidency, did pretty good. And that entire political platform was essentially based on an anti-Catholic sentiment, to stop immigration, to stop Catholic immigration into this country, and to get rid of the Catholics who were here. Why? Why were we willing to actually storm into convents looking for stockpiles of weapons? Why? Because you can't be both Catholic and American. You can't. I mean, you can't have adherence to both the Pope and the President, right? What if the Pope tells you to do something that's against American law? You got to follow it. You can't be loyal to both the Vatican and Washington. You can't be Catholic and American. This was standard, mainstream political rhetoric in the 19th century. And of course, today, Catholics are as much a part of the religious and cultural fabric of this country as anybody else. We saw the exact same thing happen again in the interwar period. This time it was Jews. You had American icons, people like Henry Ford, who published the protocols of the Elders of Zion in his newspapers and then forced his dealerships around the country to sell them like it was news. You had religious figures, people like Father Charles Coughlin, kind of like the Billy Graham of his time, although unlike Billy Graham, a despicable anti-Semite, went around the country talking about the Jews as Christ killers. His organization was eventually disrupted by the FBI when they discovered that he was stockpiling weapons in anticipation of that final battle with the Jews. Again, this was not fringe conceptions. This was mainstream ideas. We were dealing with the refugee crisis back then too. And the same sentiment that you see today against Syrian refugees, you saw back then against Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust. Why? Because you can't be Jewish and American. You can't. They're not like us. They have a different ethnicity. They don't pray like us. They don't look like us. They are not us. And of course, again, a generation later, Jews are as much a part of the cultural fabric of this country as anybody else. Nowadays, the people who would have been right there, shoulder to shoulder with Father Charles Coughlin, never get tired of talking about the Judeo-Christian foundations upon which this country was formed. And if you were not an expert on religion, Judeo-Christian means Protestant. That's what that means. In case you were wondering. Never in my life heard a Jew use that phrase. So, what does this mean? Well, it means that the rhetoric is the same, the other has changed. That's all that's going on. But it also, I think, brings up something very important. You see, Catholics weren't integrated into American society because Americans learned about Catholicism. Okay? Jews were not integrated into American society because Americans learned about Judaism. I mean, let's be serious here. I would say most of Americans' knowledge of Judaism comes from episodes of Seinfeld. I think that's probably the sum and total of most Americans' knowledge of what Judaism is. No. And this is a fundamental truth about bigotry of all forms. And that is that bigotry is not the result of ignorance. Bigotry is the result of fear. I think sometimes particularly when I speak in college campuses, or when I'm surrounded by intelligent, intellectual, liberal audiences, there's this idea that, oh, well, if you're a bigot, it's because you're ignorant. And if we could just, teach you things, you'd stop being a bigot. I know a lot of well-informed bigots, okay? Bigotry is not the result of ignorance. Bigotry is the result of fear. And fear is impervious to data. Fear is impervious to information. No amount of information is going to take away someone's fear. People like Pamela Geller,